Well, for a few hours last night, investors thought the U.S. China trade deal was dead, and that sent stock futures plummeting. It all started when White House trade advisor Peter Navarro made some confusing comments about the China trade deal during a late night interview on Fox News.
I think that here's, I think, the turning point. They came here on January 15th to sign that trade deal.
Yep.
And that was a full 2 months after they knew the virus was out and about. It was at the time when they had already sent hundreds of thousands of people to this country to spread that virus. And it was just minutes after Wheels Up, when that plane took off, that we began to hear about this pandemic. And I think everybody here inside the perimeter and around this country now understands that China lied.
Now, the markets reacted immediately, as you might imagine. S&P futures were down about 2%. We had Dow futures off 400 points. But then Navarro walked back his comments, and he said they were taken, quote, wildly out of context. Navarro clarified that he was speaking broadly about trust between the U.S. and China. And President Trump then quickly tweeted that the deal was, quote, fully intact. And the markets, they promptly rallied, regaining all the lost ground. And right now we have Dow futures up nearly 285 points, we'll call it. NASDAQ futures up 69, and we have S&P futures up more than 30. By the way, in a regular trade yesterday, the NASDAQ was able to close at a record high. All right, for more now, I want to bring in Gordon Chang. He is author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S. China Tech War. Gordon, good to have you here this morning. Just first off, what do you make of what Peter Navarro said last night? Was that a bit of a Freudian slip, do you think?
Well, it's perplexing what's going on. But clearly, President Trump, with his tweet, made clear that the trade deal is still on. I think what Navarro was suggesting, though, and this is something that the markets need to consider, and that is tension between China and the rest of the world is certainly going to affect the phase one trade deal at some point. The deal is not going to survive if China does something unacceptable. And we've got to be concerned as China's lashing out along its perimeter. The other thing that's concerned, and this is in the background, is that the Chinese economy does not appear to be recovering well. And the question then becomes, will Beijing be able to meet its purchase commitments under the phase one deal, which is an additional $200 billion in goods and services over a 2-year period? That's quite a hefty deal. So those are things that people, I think, should keep in the back of their minds.
Gordon, do you think the trade deal with China survives until the November election?
I think, yes, it probably does, largely because President Trump wants to keep it. Also, you've got powerful constituents in the U.S. economy that want to keep it. The farmers, of course, and manufacturers. China has actually been meeting its commitments to buy manufactured goods, but it'd been lagging on its farm purchases until at least that Hawaii meeting between Secretary of State Pompeo and Counselor Yang Jiechi. So this is something where you have people in the U.S. who want this deal to stay in place.
Gordon, how realistic is it, though, that China will be able to make good on its promises to buy all of those agricultural products? That was even a question pre-pandemic. What do things look like now? Well,
a couple things. China needs foreign food, so it's got to buy from somewhere. And ultimately, whether China's economy recovers or not, Beijing can just make a political commitment to buy. Remember, trade with China and the rest of the world, even in normal times, is political. So Beijing can buy things and store them. And that's very well may be what they do to honor their phase one deal.
Gordon, do you think Navarro's comments were essentially a trial balloon for that they would put out, the Trump administration would put out there, and the potential to take a harder line in China in front of the election? And clearly Navarro didn't like the market reaction, so he quickly walked it back.
Yeah, I don't know what was going through Peter's mind. I mean, it could have been he made a slip when trying to answer Martha's question. Maybe it was, as you say, a Freudian slip. To me, I'm just totally perplexed by it. But, clearly there are elements in the administration that are very concerned about China right now. And that, I think, came through in Navarro's comments, whether he intended them or not.
Do you see China as a bit of a pawn in the election campaign as we move closer to November 3rd? Do we need to fear that perhaps the trade deal could be very tenuous come September, October, as Trump continues to needle the Chinese?
Well, certainly, Trump has every reason in the world to keep the Phase 1 deal in place. I mean, he's proud of it. He boasts about it. So I don't think he's going to try to do something to undermine it. But this is not a question about us, Alexis. This is a question more about what China is doing right now. You know, June 15th, it killed 20 Indian soldiers on Indian territory. This was an act of aggression. China's been threatening acts of aggression against other countries, most notably Japan and Taiwan, but it's been involved in an increased tempo of dangerous intercepts of the U.S. Navy in the global commons. So this is going to be not something where they become a pawn in our election. They will become a factor, and it will have nothing to do with what Vice President Biden or President Trump want to do in terms of campaigning. It's what Beijing wants to do, because they will have a vote in this election.
How so?
Gordon,
What do you mean when they say they're going to have a vote in this election? What do you mean?
They're going to try to influence it one way or the other. There's an argument about whether they want Biden or whether they want Trump, but they've been pretty clear on the propaganda. There's been a lot of it actually recently. Also, as the New York Times reported, they are now mobilizing their bots and their trolls. We've seen them in connection with the coronavirus epidemic and the George Floyd protests. Beijing's foreign ministry and the Global Times, the Communist Party tabloid, have been weighing in ways which are actually quite inflammatory. So clearly Beijing wants to decide who is going to be the next American president, and they're going to put a lot of effort behind it.
So let's say, for instance, to your mind, would a Biden presidency be something China would be happier with than keeping Trump in office? And if that is the case, might they try to hurt the trade deal as we move closer to the election to make Trump look bad?
Yeah, clearly right now, Beijing, I think, likes certain aspects of a Trump presidency, and they like certain aspects of a Biden presidency. You know, Biden would be more effective and therefore less advantageous for China in terms of getting, for instance, other countries to band together in a coalition against Beijing. But Biden has said things which indicate his China policies would be much more favorable to Beijing than Trump's. So it's going to be, both candidates have vulnerabilities on China, but only one of those candidates can affect people's perceptions of their China position, and that's the president through action. And I don't know how all of this plays out, but I do think that Trump will try to keep that trade deal in place, although he is going to protect American interests on other fronts. And that's, of course, going to anger Beijing.
And we saw last night, as the stock futures were whipsawed, how very sensitive the market is to that trade deal. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S. China Tech War. Thanks for your insights this morning.
Thanks, Alexis and Brian.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.